Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 27 team selection. Freshly recovered from the devastating Gameweek 26 that I had. I believe I ended up with 78 points, and that was mostly due to a couple benching decisions, a couple captaincy decisions, only one really. And that was it. 78 points, meaning I dropped to 118,000 in the world. We're looking at Gameweek 26 being the end of the assistant managership, so that's nice in the sense that I don't think we'll have that sort of volatility going forwards, but it is another game week where I will be considering a differential captaincy, and that's something that I have to do. It's not that I have to do it, but I think I'll take my chances based on the odds once again. This is a much better opportunity to get what I would call free risk versus Salah, and I know the risk isn't free because of course the outcomes are things like last week where I take a -12 swing, but we'll have to do it again. And you don't have to do it because I guess you can just watch me fail if you believe that it will. So the plan is to captain Palmer this week. He's been pretty mild, to be honest. I watched that Chelsea versus Aston Villa game and I was desperate for an Emery win, and we got that Emery win, I think, by a lot of fortune and the help of Jorgensen. Whereas Palmer, if I recall, even within that game, had one great chance to really dink the goalkeeper Emi, but didn't do it, and then also had a good opportunity to maybe lay Nkunku in, but they were clearly out of sync if you guys remember watching the replay of that game. Other than that, I think, Salah was incredible, just very, very precise. So were his teammates, and they're clearly in a great spot of form. And when you look at the Newcastle game, I'm sure a lot of people generally think that Newcastle were awful, because if you watch the second half of that Newcastle match, you'll know what I'm talking about. They were very, very close to throwing that game back to Nottingham Forest, especially after the Ryan Yates substitution. And then obviously you're looking at Newcastle once again playing versus midweek. And to be honest, historically, the recent results for Newcastle haven't been great versus Liverpool, but they've also been able to score, which is nice. And Liverpool last season, I think, broke a record as well when it comes to expected goals versus Newcastle. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so good for my punt over the Palmer captaincy. Other than that, there's quite a few bits of news that I like to talk through with my team. Mbumo's fine, Trossard's fine. Dango seems like he's actually going to play this match in Gameweek 27, so I think that's quite interesting, right? He played in the 10 versus 11, then almost slotted a little bit deeper because of the ramifications of the Zabarni red card. And I suppose the key point is, does Evanilson come back? Does he play significant minutes this weekend? I don't think that's the case. Looking at the latest Iraola quotes, it seems like Evanilson hasn't trained whatsoever, it lines up with what I thought, especially when you have a surgery out for such a long while. You're probably going to be dealing with lack of match fitness, and you need that match fitness to start at some point in time. But I don't know if that was the opportunity to throw Evanilson into a game in a 10 versus 11. Whereas this weekend, you could see that Evanilson could maybe play the 10 minutes that Iraola was talking about, that Evanilson was projected to potentially play versus Wolves. And that's going to maybe take away, not necessarily minutes from Dango, but it could maybe take away minutes from certain other players. Because my intuition, as I've mentioned before, is that Dango will probably just drop into a left wing position. We'll have to see whether that actually is true and whether or not Evanilson will play whatsoever, because he hasn't been training or hasn't trained properly. As far as the defense, I think it's much simpler this week. There's not really what I would call 50-50s. I think probably mention last week that I played Castagna as a way to hedge against Glasner. I didn't really mean it in the sense that it was a hedge. I just meant, just looking at the market odds for Fulham to actually get a good result, it made sense to actually back those odds for Castagna as opposed to it being an outright hedge. Because clearly, if I was hedging, I would have just played Munoz. That's correct. I meant more so that most people play Munoz in a situation where they're also sort of backing for the best positive outcome variance with Glasner, and that's fine. It didn't go my way, and I get that. And with Flecken and Allison, it's just going to be another 50-50 this week. I think it's even closer. The clean sheet odds are much closer because Brentford have actually racked up a series of good performances, 2 clean sheets back to back, whereas Liverpool have conceded goals in various odd games with exception to the City game, but actually have not very crucially conceded a lot of expected goals conceded. If you actually want to think about some of the decisions that we can make this week, I've already created 2 pieces of content. So the transfer plans, which outlines sort of my plans heading out of Gameweek 27, which look towards, let's say, how I plan to get towards Gameweek 29, the blank there with a strong team, and then also my plans to a wildcard 31/32. On top of that, we have the cheat sheet video as well. So if you're interested in looking at any decisions that, don't pertain my players, for example, or pertain, circumstances where, some people still own Rodgers, some people still own Wood, are thinking of a Cunha, a Marmoush, a Bowen, for example. Those kind of things I iterate within the cheat sheet video. and hopefully that can help you out with your decision making for this game week. But going back to my team, it's a lot simpler, and it's nice also to have Beto as a little bit of a depth option going forwards. And what seems to be nice, I suppose, is we don't have any news whatsoever on Dominic Calvert-Lewin returning. We also don't have news necessarily on Broja coming back, and I think Beto's minutes are very much secure because he's also on a very hot streak of form. With João Pedro, the biggest news there when it comes to Welbeck is actually that Welbeck is still a doubt. My issue, I suppose, is Herzler doesn't really ever tell us the truth, so it really has to be a guess this week as to whether we go for João Pedro. He's at home. Brighton are finally in a good spot of form where they've racked up some really good results, but not just results in terms of the goals scored, but results actually in terms of the underlying numbers. What I previously criticized a team like Brighton for early in the mid-season was actually just that the results were really poor when it comes to underlying numbers, and they were overperforming those numbers. And now it actually seems like with a rack of recent results, obviously versus weaker teams, they've actually consolidated really good numbers. And actually, if you look back at previous games, let's say before they played Southampton this weekend, I mean, ultimately they had some really poor results versus really bad teams like Leicester, like Southampton, where they didn't actually rack up a lot of XG, and now they're actually doing that while João Pedro is still on the pitch, which is a new positive, because we could have maybe contextualized that João Pedro was part of the problem with a short sample. Now it seems like Welbeck is still a doubt, and I think this is a good opportunity to play João Pedro, so I'm actually quite intrigued in playing him, and I probably will play him this weekend. But that's pretty much it for my team, and we'll jump into my Gameweek 27 team selection. So starting with defense, easy to sort of back the odds once again. We'll be looking at this as an opportunity to simply play the home players that I have within my team, and then also Gabriel, just given the fixture compared to Castagna. Not too controversial this weekend, and I'll play Flecken versus Alisson Becker. The odds are close, and we're going to share Rob T's odds as well on this. Rob T has, is the absolute best when it comes to sharing some of the spread market data and the sort of projected numbers. For this week, though, the clean sheet odds for, let's say, Liverpool and Brentford are very close. They're basically neck and neck, both 31%. The only thing that actually makes me want to play Flecken over, let's say, Alisson is I am going to either play Isak or Beto. And depending on who I play, I think it's more likely that I want to bench the other goalkeeper just so that I can sort of hopefully maximize the outcome variance. Now, I do have Trent in my team, and that means that regardless, I'll have ownership within the Liverpool defense, but he's also an attacking player. And that's always a bit of a pro when it comes to situations where I expect the clean sheet to be lost, or I'm hoping at least that there could be a both teams to score type of scenario. So that's why I'm playing Trent, Munoz, Gabriel, and Flecken. In the midfield, shifting on over to that, we're looking at, once again, the Salah captaincy debate. I don't think it's a debate for a lot of managers, but for myself, I think this is a very easy opportunity to tap into Palmer. Looking at 11FI's projected numbers for goal scoring odds, it actually seems very, very clearly in favor of Palmer. Last week, if people want to sort of jump into conclusions on that, Salah was actually leading the list, but actually players like Mbeumo, Isak were quite close, and then also Trossard was close as well. This week, we have Palmer quite clear, simply just due to the fixture gap. Yes, of course, Newcastle looked poor in the previous game, and I'm sure, we can't really deny that Salah's in undeniably disgustingly good form, but I'll take my chances, especially with the sort of ownership equation involved and the risk that I can get from Palmer captaincy. So I'll be playing Palmer captaincy in this situation, and I think it's something I'm very comfortable with. As far as Trossard and Mbeumo Dango, this is the biggest question within my team, because it goes back to whether I want to play someone like Beto, and that also comes down to something like Dango's own minutes. If we think that Evan Nilsson will play, if that Dango will be an earlier substitution, there could be a possibility that maybe I don't play Dango here. But I think I do want to sort of maximize the outcomes a little bit within my team. And maybe whilst Beto is outright better than Dango by a small margin, I would say for this game week, just due to the guarantee of minutes for Beto and less so for Dango, I would still like to play Dango in this situation because of what I talked about with the goalkeeping situation. So planning to play Trossard and Mbeumo and Dango. And then in the front line, I will be playing João Pedro and Isak. João Pedro has been a troll. I'm sure a lot of people have mentioned it. He's come back. I still think he's a very good, valuable player within the game, as long as Brighton are performing reasonably well on the attack and he's actually involved and starting within games for Brighton, then he's going to be a good pick. Now, the biggest question mark is going to be if Welbeck comes back, and when he comes back, does he actually start immediately? Does he sort of seat João Pedro and Rutter sort of play over him within the 10 spot? I'm not so sure about that for this week specifically. I think it's very likely that João Pedro can start in either position, and I'll take my chances with João Pedro because I do think that ultimately, if I was to envision a world where João Pedro was playing and starting and playing at least 75 minutes within the match, and maybe Welbeck comes later, or maybe he's protected, then just looking at the odds for João Pedro, it's much better than a Dango, for example, or a Beto this week, even if they were to play the full match, just given that they actually have tougher away matches. So the plan is to play João Pedro and sort of hopefully the minutes follow in suit. As far as Isak, I am planning to play him as well. There is a possibility where maybe I could flip it and go for a little bit more of a risky situation in terms of ownership, where I can actually play Allison over Flecken and then play Beto over Isak. And part of this would be, I suppose, backing a complete Liverpool result within the team. That's something that I've actually considered. So this sort of option number 2, I suppose, of my team is I play Beto and I play the Liverpool goalkeeper. Let me know what your thoughts are on that, because I actually don't think that that's going to change, let's say, the projected expected points for a team like this. It's very close when I look at, let's say, the Isak, goal scoring odds for this week versus Beto. It's not amazing. Ultimately, they're both away, and obviously different qualities of players here, but Beto has still a much better fixture as a gap compared to Isak, which sort of bridges that. Whereas Flecken, of course, with Allison, plays for a much worse defense, but then also plays a much easier opponent, so to speak. So let me know what your thoughts are in terms of maybe playing the combination of Allison and Beto over Flecken and Isak. Let's just say option 1 is Flecken and Isak, and option 2 is Becker and Beto. Would be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that. In terms of captaincy, I'm also very intrigued to see what people are going for themselves. This isn't a week where I would say you really have to consider changing your captaincy to Palmer, because there's the risk involved. I think if you've been consistently captaining Salah, he's undeniably played great, and so have Liverpool. So if you have any sort of temptation to differential captaincy at all, I think that's where the situation for Palmer captaincy arises. Otherwise, it's just business as usual for all managers with a Salah captaincy, and it's pretty uncontroversial as a segment. And that's pretty much it for my thoughts for the team selection. As I said, I've created a lot of content for this weekend for the short turnaround, so thank you guys so much for supporting the content. The cheat sheet is around. I think the sort of biggest movers really is just the reflection of things like Marmoush, Bowen, Cunha, these being transfer priority options for a lot of key players for this game week, particularly as people are looking to ship out the likes of Rodgers, the likes of Wood, for example, and so on and so forth. As we also come closer towards Game Week 29 and an opportunity to move into some of the priority options, like maybe, I don't know, some of the City players in Game Week 29 and prepping for that as a part of that. Marmoush is also quite interesting with Haaland being out. So that's it for this week's video. I hope you guys have a wonderful time, and I'll see you guys on the deadline tomorrow. So take care, and I'll see you guys soon.